Hello everyone, my name is Sheyenne Grainger. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I am a graduate student in the Department of Sociology. A few fun things about me are that I like to watch anime, box, write poetry, and even roller skate. Raise your hands if we have any anime fans in the room. How about Solo Leveling? I am actually Dr. Kaiser's TA, and this is my second semester working with him, as well as it's my second semester in the master's program. I really enjoyed getting a glimpse of your topics of interest when grading, and hopefully you're at least a little bit entertained by what I have to share today as well. That being said, talking at a classroom all day doesn't align with my teaching philosophy. So, please feel free to raise your hand and participate, ask questions, snap your fingers, and just be prepared because I have some assignments prepared for you. So I hope at least some of you brought your pencils, and if not, some will be provided to you. And look out for the group handouts with the activities on them that I've passed out earlier. Before we get started, I just want to talk about the two learning objectives for today. And the first and the most important one is to understand collective action from a critical standpoint and considering the barrier of censorship. Secondly, we want to analyze the social distinctions between movements, organizations, and strategies, just so we have a more nuanced understanding of what collective action is and how to apply it. Lastly, we'll be closing out with a group activity called Think Like an Activist, where we'll be using what we know and what we've learned to apply it to inventing strategies for collective progress. In this first part, what is collective action? We're going to be defining the term, understanding how collective action can be a danger to social inequality, and then you'll get a sneak peek into my positionality and why I personally find this topic to be both timely and relevant. But before I go handing you a definition of the term, let's try to see if we can come up with a definition together. Think back to this week's readings. Do you have a hint about what collective action might mean? What words come to mind when you hear the word collective action? You have up to about 5 submissions. Just write down, it can be a sentence, it can be a word or two or three, just whatever you're thinking. Collective action includes any activity by two or more individuals where people seek to repurpose public space and are distinguished from other forms of collective action, such as riots, by their organization and by their purpose. So is everyone still with me? Do we feel like we have a good understanding of what collective action is? Or does anyone have any questions? So, why is collective action relevant or a danger to inequality? And the reason for this is because of its controversial and revolutionary nature. You can see the definitions of controversy and revolt on the right. But essentially, the moment that you disagree with any system or authority about something, go against it in any way, even if the system has evidence of malpractice or proof of producing inequality, and you impose it, that is controversy, the disagreement. But the moment you act upon that disapproval, you are a rebel acting against it. You're a revolutionary. But a part of the reason that this topic is so important to me is because my identity expression itself is a subject of controversy. As a Black woman who has been exposed to many of the systemic racial inequalities in the US, you could say that my very existence is an act of rebellion against society. A part of that identity that I pride myself on is my natural hair, my natural type 4 hair. And you can't tell because it's in boho knotless braids right now, but when worn out, my type 4 crown defies laws of gravity and codes of conduct. But with black hair expression comes creativity and versatility, head wraps, locks, cornrows, you name it. And growing up, I went to an all-black public charter school where the dress code stated I could not wear a head wrap. But I'm not the only one. A black woman named Chastity Jones accepted a job offer that was later rescinded when she refused to cut her locks due to a discriminatory policy that said they tend to get messy. The EEOC filed a lawsuit and lost, just like many of these similar court cases filed over the course of over 40 years. But for me, it's bigger than just the hair. It's affecting other ways or other parts of my life. I am an aspiring sociology professor, and my passion in life is to teach classes about social justice, race, and gender inequality. Classes like this that create conversations. In high school, I've read the required, not optional works of African American literature, like The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird, written by white hands, with its controversial inclusion of white saviorism, usage of racial slurs and derogatory remarks, and I opposed its contents to the teacher directly and saw the unhealthy conversations and ideologies they created. And so I made it my goal in life to challenge those incomplete truths in a setting intended for higher learning, just to later find out that many black authors would be banned and or censored from college courses or completely. And it's not just black authors. It's LGBTQ authors, it's disabled authors, it's authors that don't fit the status quo. Speaking of censorship, as many of you know, the Ohio Senate Bill 1, or SB 1, decided to define controversy to include subjects of DEI as controversial. There's a quote from Senator Michelle Reynolds where she says, "It's not about censure or erasure, it's not about exclusion, it's about inclusion that it transcends labels, because DEI has become a system that sorts us by race, gender, identity, creating a culture where we're defined by our categories instead of our character, where we look at each other's faces instead of listening to each other's hearts." And while the sentiment itself sounds beautiful and contains truth, it also contains traces of colorblind ideology and the willful blindness of any sort, whether that be the issue of color, climate, sexuality, gender, or ability, discourages any accountability for the differences in those experiences. Why should we trade in our intersectional lenses that offer us a window facing the light for a pair of shades? How can we as a collective hope to improve upon a system when we refuse to see the cultural divide that it creates? Not that I or anyone else wants to be sorted like documents in a folder, but let's not forget the sociopolitical history where people who look like me or you were sorted, segregated, or isolated in our daily lives based on those same categories. So, when having discussions about these distinctions in our identity, it's important that we don't view it as a sorting, but as an unpacking of the social impacts of those differences, and that we have those conversations unrestricted so we can discover common ground. That is the art of sociology, which is at the heart of academia. The thing is, I am a Black woman, and though it's far from all that I am, it's still a big part of who I am. It's a part of what shaped my passion for creating social equality through collective action. Faking the funk dilutes my authenticity, both as a proud Black woman and future educator. You wouldn't want to purchase a watered down drink, or fake gold jewelry that makes your ears, fingers, or neck turn green. So, I wouldn't expect you to pay for a class where you get an eggshell walking professor who just wants to keep her job.
The culture and just being black, I can't help that, man. It's just not something that I think about or even try to like go. I'm black. I'm at a point in my life I can't necessarily fake the funk for nothing. I have to be who I am authentically, and if the world can't accept that, then so be it. I'm gonna put it all the way out there, whether it's in private or whether it's on the main stage.
Kendrick puts how I feel about authenticity and identity into words here. That brings us to our second section, where we will focus on analyzing the distinctions. We should proceed with caution when it comes to comparing movements, opening with principles and goals. Then we will differentiate between different forms of collective action, like movements, organizations, and strategy, which are the key elements of this section. By the end, you should understand why making these distinctions are key. Well, let's take a moment to look at some definitions of what a movement is, as well as an organization and a strategy. So, a movement is not a crowd, but a community of people who are moved by a shared vision or goal to improve society. It describes both the life cycle that we just talked about and framework of this joint effort. It begins with a story of struggle, is ignited by successful resistance to oppression, and requires hope as a sustaining source. The movement itself is a culmination of all of the leaders, organizations, and strategies it is associated with. It does not have one face, nor is it necessarily subjugated to one space and time. Now, an organization is a group of people, and usually the characteristics of those people are within the same culture, or they share the same values or principles, who mobilize their shared resources to produce functional changes. Last but certainly not least, the strategy is the game plan. It's when organizations or even movements create tactics to achieve the goals of that movement or organization. It can be a skill, such as public speaking, a strength, a tool, or any resource or means of progressing that goal. So by now, you might be wondering why I just slapped a block of text here with some highlights on it. And the reason is because this text block serves as an example of how collective action concepts can get confused and confusing, even in academia and research articles. When coming across articles like this, where more clarity is needed, it can be broken down into workable chunks. So here you'll see that I highlighted those three movements in yellow. But notice this, the Black Panthers are listed as a type of Black nationalist movement, when the Black Panther Party is actually a national charter or organization. The concept of Black nationalism, which is the agreement that rather than assimilation and integration into colonist nations, there needed to be a creation of a separate Black nation. The reason we shouldn't confuse movements with organizations is that it leads to errors like this, where the goals get mixed up or comparisons that don't fully make sense are made. Like, for example, Int is essentially saying here that the Black Lives Matter is often compared to the civil rights movement, when it really should be more so compared to Black nationalist movements, because their goals or characteristics are more in alignment. Well, goals, for one, integration was not, nor is it the only or even main goal of the civil rights movement, but instead it arose out of a long history of anti-Black legislation, such as the Jim Crow and Black codes, and lynchings of Black people and even children, like Emmett Till. Emmett Till, if you're not familiar with the story, is a 14-year-old boy who was lynched a few months before the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. And that's what many people or many articles actually consider to be the trigger for the civil rights movement. But here's a side note on top of that side note. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was not even passed until 2022. That's proof that a movement in itself is more of a cycle. It's not an organization. It's not even just a set of codes or goals. Many times we try to make these movements sound historical or like something has already ended when many of the goals of the civil rights movement is something that we're still fighting for today. That was only 3 years ago. Likewise, the Black Lives Matter movement arose in response to the killing of Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old boy shot and killed by a mixed white Hispanic American named George Zimmerman. To that degree, beginning as a response to the killings of Black Americans is something that they both have in common. So even though we're being cautioned to in comparisons with the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, they are indeed similar. Black Lives Matter movement draws upon many of the goals and principles of the Civil Rights Movement. Many movements in general do. It also just blankly states that it shares characteristics of Black national movements without even listing any of them. Which of these characteristics do they have in common? If you look on Black Lives Matter's website and view their mission statement, you'll see that it combines principles from both of the movements while stating its own distinct goal that's separate from both of them. You'll see traces of abolition and liberation there, but without the sentiment of Black nationalism. Lastly, strategies or tactics are the actions or tools utilized by movements and organizations to achieve goals. Charismatic leadership, for example, is a universal one that's applicable for all movements and organizations listed. The tactics of protesting, boycotts, policy advocacy, those are also all utilized by any of the three that we just mentioned, but just in different ways and for different reasons. Hashtags, however, as a strategy was popularized by the Black Lives Matter movement or hashtag Black Lives Matter movement, which utilizes social media as a tool in such a way that predecessors from prior movements did not yet have access to, not like we do in this day and age. It's proof that strategies for collective action are continuously developing.
It's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them.
Speaking of strategy and strategy selection, we don't want our strategies to distract from the importance of the goal of the movement. The strategy is just the means of getting there. And I think Angela Davis puts it very well in this clip. So let's take a minute to break down what Angela is saying here in this clip. What do you think about what she means by this quote? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? What is she actually trying to say? But before you answer, let's just, make some distinction between some of the things that she was talking about. Principles are the values, how you go about your strategy. The goals are the idea, what you are trying to accomplish. And then the strategies are the actions. That's the way that you reach them, the way you reach those goals. Really quickly, I wanted to talk about the movement compass and how seeing a movement as a life cycle rather than just a series of goals and strategies might be more effective when it comes to analyzing collective action. Now, it is in 6 stages, but I do want to zoom in on the enduring crisis and the trigger point. So, we talked about earlier about how the civil rights movement was actually in response to an enduring crisis, over 400 years of slavery, the history of lynching, the the policies that were against Black bodies, the Jim Crow laws, the Black codes. These were all things that Black people had to endure over extended periods of time. It wasn't until there was a heroic hope or an uprising, where there was resistance against the system of oppression, that it was considered to be a movement. Social movement theory itself suggests that mobilization, the process of preparing something to be capable of movement, occurs when the aggrieved groups, in this case Black people, acquire previously inaccessible resources. In other words, social movement theory says that when the group affected by an issue demand a solution for it or begin to demand solutions, that's when social movement is activated. Now, I said before that a lot of people or a lot of articles, research articles, suggest that the Montgomery bus boycott is what started the civil rights movement. When if that were to be the case, it would neglect the story of Emmett Till. However, because that was an organized effort against the system of oppression, the legalized system of oppression, in which it was being enforced, the segregation of the buses. That was the most tangible effort and campaign that was attainable to Black Americans at that time. And that form of resistance, or the ability to even resist, was now awakened amongst the Black population. And so that could be considered, or is understandable as to why it's considered the trigger point for the civil rights movement. So now we're going to get into some examples of the distinctions. We have a movement, an organization, and a strategy that we're going to break down here. So first we have the civil rights movement. And as we talked about before, it's not a movement that is confined to just one goal, which is to desegregate the buses or integrate the schools. But its goal was for Black freedoms and institutional equality. This is a movement that birthed many Black organizations, not just the NAACP, but also the SNCC and many others. Now, the thing about it is, the leaders that are associated with the civil rights movement use tactics of both nonviolence and civil disobedience. I say this because it's important not to print Martin Luther King Jr.'s face on the entire movement, because we would be ignoring the roles of other prominent civil rights leaders who were also part of other leading Black movements. Next up, we have the Black Panther Party, which is an organization affiliated with the Black Power or Black nationalist movements. They employed strategies like armed self-defense, and their demonstrations often occurred alongside civil rights protests. Many civil rights movement leaders were also affiliated with the Black Power or nationalist movements. This includes Malcolm X with the Nation of Islam, Stokely Carmichael, who was a part of the SNCC, the same organization that Martin Luther King led, and Fred Hampton himself, who was a leader of Chicago's Black Panther Party. Now, when we take the time to learn about this organization, which was also founded as a Democratic political party in Alabama in response to white supremacy for the right, which was represented by the white rooster emblem. Stokely Carmichael, who left MLK's SNCC in 1967 to become Prime Minister of Oakland's Black Panther Party, popularized slogans like Black Power to restore racial confidence and solidarity. But there were also popular slogans like all power to the people, which was meant to challenge the institutional powers that be and reallocate them to all oppressed and marginalized people in an act of liberation. Last but not least, we have the Last but not least, we have hashtag Black Lives Matter, which is a strategy popularized by the Black Lives Matter movement. and it's unique in that it evolved from a hashtag to a movement in July 2013. Below you'll see a picture of its founders, Opal on the left, Patrice in the middle, and Alicia on the right. The strategy was then implemented by other popular movements like Me Too, which already had a social media presence since 2006, but it became popularized in 2017, 4 years after the Black Lives Matter movement, hashtag Black Lives Matter, to draw attention to the issue. It spreaded awareness, empathy, and empowerment. It's important to note that hashtag Black Lives Matter is unique in that it's a movement, an organization, and a strategy. But the concept of the movement itself is arguably the most vital element. Even if society is divided by the strategies and principles of the organization, you cannot reasonably argue with the slogan. All you can do is attempt to overshadow it. That's why you don't hear people saying Black lives don't matter, just all lives matter. Okay, so what? Why do we need to emphasize so strongly where and why these things are different from each other? And I have three answers for you. One, it helps us to avoid generalizations and false comparisons between social movements. For example, there's a myth that being a part of or supporting Black social movements means that you condone violence. And violence, while it is a strategy and a necessary strategy for advancing social movements, is not a strategy that is employed by every movement. Secondly, to avoid confusion due to the conflation of ideas. And to conflate something means to mix things up in a way that blurs the differences. It's important that we understand the nuance between these ideas so we don't confuse the goals of a movement with the strategies of an organization. For example, the myth that the civil rights movement was a nonviolent movement. Nonviolence was only one strategy employed by the leaders during this period. And placing public leaders perceived to be peaceful and hence more digestible, such as Martin Luther King Jr., was a whitewashing technique to dilute the radical core of the movement. Neglecting to mention other strategies or movements like the freedom rides limits its scope. Last but not least, and I'm sure that there are many other reasons, is to assist the strategic actions of individuals. Understanding these differences allows activists, people who want to take action, to understand where they start. Which movement goals do you most align yourself with? Are there any organizations that are working towards this greater societal goal? How so? What are their ideas and the principles around their strategies? How are you able to bring your personal strengths to the table to contribute? What strategies are you willing to commit to? These are the questions that you ask yourself if you plan on taking action. And it's hard to even get there if you don't know where to start. So let's start here. We're going to jump right into our class activity, which is called Think Like an Activist. So what I want you to do is consider the social movements of today. It doesn't have to be about civil rights, freedom, or race. It can be about anything. It can be about the Me Too movement, Occupy Wall Street movement, environmental justice movement. You can think of it. It doesn't matter. What does matter is we're thinking of creative strategies. And you should be able to list about anywhere from 1 to 5. The goal here is to just kind of compile a list of new inventions